by the invitation. Just a minute. So, hello everyone. We are starting our second or third final session of this workshop. It could be called a conference. We have so many presentations and etc. Yes, Verena, I still didn't have a chance to introduce you. Our next speaker is my colleague, or as I call it, my partner in crime, that has been running this project together with me. I'm running it with her for the last 7 years, amazingly. We've started this with the war in Syria. And turns out there are still enough wars, unfortunately, and enough need for what we are doing. So, Dr. Verena Buzer research centers on Hachshara and non-Zionist immigration preparation, childhood and youth during and after the Shoah, forced Germanization of Polish children, and the Jewish functionaries under Nazi rule. Dr. Buzer's work was, among others, supported by the Sloma Albam Foundation in Berlin and the Blatavnik Archives Foundation in New York, and the Leubeck Institute in New York. Together, we founded the Children After Holocaust, War and Genocide. She's published a number of articles and research papers, just recently about detention camp Atlit and the Jewish camp elder in an Auschwitz subcamp. So Verena, we'll talk today about the ORT organization and,
yes.
And young Holocaust survivors. Verena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And yes, so just a few words before I start. In the frame of our project, Children After War, Holocaust and Genocide, which we founded, as was mentioned, 7 years ago, already 7 years ago, yes. It is, among others, our aim to disseminate the best practices and mixed methods which were invented and applied in the past and are not yet known to caretakers and aid givers today. So, as we always say, then and now children, but also, of course, teens or young adults are the most vulnerable victims of flight scenarios, armed conflicts, and genocidal conditions. They experience these expulsions and flights and are targets of violence, neglect, ill treatment, exploitation, sexual abuse, and other offenses. So as we claim, and as Boaz already said, the project aim claims that historians can be of aid by providing at least a little aid, knowledge and approaches that have been already contested and proven. And I think we can discuss this at the end of this panel. Yeah, and against this background of this Children After War, Holocaust and Genocide project, but also my wider research on training young German Jews within the frame of Hachshara and non-Zionist training, which means for the Aliyah or to other countries than Mandate Palestine, I came repeatedly across the work of the ORT. And I'm really grateful that now I can not only research as a side project, but also I just received some funding for this research by the Sloma Albam Foundation Stiftung in Berlin. So I think most of you know that ORT was founded in Russia in the 19th century. It had schools, or it ran schools in Lithuania or Latvia. It was, as the Nazis came to power, one of the largest transnational operating Jewish aid networks all over the world. Then, during the Nazi era, it was Located from 1937 onwards in Berlin-Prenzlauer Berg, just around the corner where I am now, and enabled Jewish youth to receive an education against the background of their successive exclusion from state schools in Nazi Germany. The Ort headquarters operated in Berlin until the beginning of World War II. Then it was relocated to France, where the organization supported also Jewish refugees. In 1939, students, not all of them, only some of them, were sent to the new Ort School in Leeds in the UK via the Kitchener camp, a refugee camp in the south of England. Still, until 1941, shortly before the immigration from Nazi Germany was banned, young people in Berlin could be trained in various trades. Obviously, many Jewish students and teaching staff were unable to escape and were deported to concentration and extermination camps and were murdered. And I just learned, only as a footnote, that the interior, all the equipment from the Ort School was then transferred to the Ghetto Theresienstadt, Theresien. With a broad, I mentioned this because Ort had a broad expertise in supporting Jewish refugees in both the pre-war and also, of course, which is my topic today, post-war period. It was its stated goal to support and assist the young Jewish generation, not merely on a practical level, but also on a mental level, as it was the motto, rehabilitation through training. In the post-war, Ort became the recognized agency in countries all over Europe, assisting young Jewish Holocaust survivors with also again education and vocational skills to help them rebuild their lives. It's established a network of schools in the US and also in the British zones of Germany. For example, at the end of 1945, there were around 1,900 persons enrolled in courses in all over Germany, but not in the Soviet zone, of course. 2 years later, the number had risen to more than 10,000. This means that it is estimated that Ort had helped around 80,000 Jewish displaced persons in the aftermath of the Holocaust. So when we come to the topic of young Holocaust survivors, generally speaking, the survivor population in the aftermath was a young one. In 1944-45, Jewish child survivors had survived the Nazi concentration camp system, roundups or mass killings all over Europe, in hiding, such as with foreign families, in monasteries, in partisan units, or in the Soviet Union. They were the victims of a unique atrocity against the Jewish child, like Boaz always says. According to a report from the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, as of November 1945, no children younger than 6 years of age lived among the survivor population. More likely, the majority of minor survivors were in their teens. International aid organizations, the UNRWA or the JDC, the Quakers, and so on, elaborated step by step a transnational network to rehabilitate Jewish children and teens. Ort was part of this network to rehabilitate these young survivors. So I would like to give you, I just started my research, it's not a finalized version, but I would like to give you some, I found nice sources. I was in contact a lot with the Ort archives in London, and the archivist was one of the most helpful persons which I ever met in an archive, always sending sources out. Yes. So the young survivors of the Holocaust, what happened? For example, the tragic events in Poland and other Eastern European countries changed their situation. Brutal anti-Semitic assaults were followed by a wave of immigration into Germany, infantry movement of Jewish DPs from Poland and the Soviet Union. Additionally, the majority of the Jewish teens and child survivors from all over Europe had tried to return to their former countries, only to learn that their entire family had been murdered, that their pre-war homes were inhabited by new residents, and that anti-Semitism was still in evidence. And among a lot of issues in the post-war, young survivors of the Holocaust in their teens or late teens or in the early 20s had several things in common. They lost home and family or lived in uncertainty about their fate, had to rebuild their lives, were premature and were living in a state of in-between. For example, in United Nations Children's Transit Children's Centers for Jewish Children. And I think my colleague Jim Tobias from Nuremberg is here, who is one of the experts on this. Yes, alike or similar to the adult survivor population, they were waiting for hope, according to the researchers Angelika Königseder and Juliane Wetzel, two former colleagues of mine who worked on the Jewish displaced persons. And important for us today in this workshop, the school or vocational life of these Jewish children and teens had been violently interrupted due to persecution, emigration, flight, deportation, and camp and ghetto existence. They had lost years of knowledge and learning, trying to search for future goals. Against the background of health problems, and we have some reports from art schools all over Germany where these problems are mentioned. Against the background of health problems and psychological problems, many had severe difficulties to concentrate. Additionally, a great majority of them speaks about difficulties to learn and find back to normalcy. According to a report from liberated Bergen-Belsen, they had little education, few had parents to advise them, and of course the adults found themselves also in a state of post-traumatic stress. They were tired of forced labor and intoxicated with the freedom regained after liberation, end quote. This was a quote, sorry. And as a footnote, I have several reports here where UNRWA caretakers complained about male teens who wouldn't listen to orders, hang around, and didn't obey to authorities and complained of the behavior and so on. And I think Imke mentioned also something about this earlier today. However, the first school of art was opened in the DP camp in Landsberg under leadership of Jacob Oleski, a Holocaust survivor himself. I quote him. As we came out of the concentration camps, there were among us neither children or old people. There were only people within the ages of 18 to 40 to 45. Lonely, single people, wretched people, subsequently a flow of people. Partisans who had lived in the forests came. And they had escaped from the ghettos with their families, and those were the first children and the first old people which we came to see. End quote. The administrative headquarters, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I told my daughter not to come now. Of course she comes now, yes? 1 second. Excuse me. So the administrative headquarters of art was in the British zone. One of the organizers between, I don't know, here. Behind, or I don't know why it's always switching, I don't do anything. In the camps was, of course, Jacob Oleski and some people who are mentioned here, Jakov Rabinovich or Helena Volkovich, was also Norbert Wollheim, a German Jew during the Holocaust, active member of the Reichsassociation of Jews in Germany and co-organizer of the Kindertransports in Berlin and Frankfurt. He survived Auschwitz-Monowitz, and already 3 months after liberation, he was active in the Belsen DP camp. Aim was, I quote, to discuss the possibilities of giving education and vocational training to the young people who had seen nothing but destruction, torture, and despair, end quote. So to put it together, ORD members interpreted their task as future-orientated, and that was to, I quote, to turn the minds of the survivors to their idea of their future, of reconstruction, and of practical preparation for life in a new homeland, end quote. Yes, and another very interesting quote I have here, because in the camp newspaper of the Belsen DP camp, in February 1946, a correspondent who visited the art school in Belsen reported the following in Unser Stimme, a Jewish DP newspaper. I quote, "My first visit was to the office of the school, where a register was kept of 250 trainees aged between 13 and 35. As soon as the students became aware of the fact that the correspondent of the paper came along in order to acquaint himself with their work and achievements, they surrounded me and begged me to write to Ort and to ask him to send tools and machinery to help the students to make up for the time lost in the Nazi camps," end quote. And one of the interesting approaches of Ort, which we are at the moment, I think, discussing also in Germany, but only as a footnote, unfortunately, the approach was to recruit instructors among the DP population. In these cases, they found skilled craftsmen who received so-called gratifications in the currency of the country to which they would eventually emigrate. Other staff members received higher food rations and other gratifications. And I think this is very promising. Boaz published also about this, about survivor caretakers. And unfortunately, I just read a paper some weeks ago that it's maybe a totally new approach to recruit, in our today's language, asylum-seeking caregivers among the refugee population. But as we see, when we look into history, it's not really new. Yes. I come to the conclusion, because we have only limited time today and I just started to make this research. I would like to end with a quote from Jacob Oleski. I quote him: "We endeavor by various methods to rehabilitate the Jewish person towards work. And by means of this, we intend to liberate him from the dark past and prepare him for a brighter and clearer future, with faith in people, faith in life, and faith in himself, since this is the most important thing in achieving a healthy personality," end quote. And this is, by example, an interview which I found in the David Boder interviews, because they interviewed Jacob Oleski, the director of Ort, in 1945. This here envisaged research aims to explore the national and transnational support for Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors with relevance to investigate and with relevance for today's world. The focus will be, and this is my aim, to focus on the Berlin DP camps, because there are still unexplored sources which I would like to analyze. The work of the author is to be seen as a best practice model that can serve, in my eyes, as a blueprint for the reception and integration of refugees today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Verena. It seems that all the stories come back to today.
Yes.
But now we have another practitioner from today, Maria El-Safti. Maria, I see you. Yes. We met Maria in the first workshop we did in Berlin, and your talk there about working with Afghani girls is something I quote to my students until today. So
it was
I
in
learned a lot
Potsdam.
from it.
It was in Potsdam.
No, Maria spoke in Pestalozzi. So Maria El-Safti is an education and family counselor in the Pestalozzi-Fröbel-Haus, Berlin since 2011. She also trained as a trauma pedagogue and lecturer for trauma pedagogy. She's been leading trauma pedagogical children groups in different compositions for over 15 years, from 2015 to 17. She accompanied families in the large refugee shelter in Tempelhof Airport, led girls groups. This is what we heard the first time we met, and supported the staff on site with further training and supervision. The experience she gained there went on to 2019-20. She assisted in courses for mental health workers working in refugee sector in Egypt and Jordan. And in this context, also gave workshops for residents of the Zaatari camp in Jordan. In addition to her employment in the Pestalozzi-Fröbel-Haus, she continues to work as a lecturer for trauma pedagogy, among other things, in the Pestalozzi-Haus College for Educators. So, Maria, the floor is yours. So,
yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to see you again. So
yeah.
I remember, we met in my workplace, Pestalozzi-Fröbel-Haus in Berlin. It took place there, and then we met again in Potsdam when it took their place. So today I have a little bit different issue, and it was very interesting for me to listen to you, to all your presentations, and especially Monika Umlauf. It was very interesting to see this container again, because I used to work in the hangars first. And you can imagine that those containers you presented here, you showed here, when the refugees could move in these containers, it was a big progress, compared to this little cubes they used to be in these hangars. And there was all so happy. Oh no, it's like look, luxury, we are in this container. So, and and that really has to do with my issue. What is happening inside of us? We start to work with refugees and to see those accommodations. And I clearly remember when I first visited the hangars in Tempelhof, in this area of the airport, of the old airport, Tempelhof. I thought, okay, what's happening? And it was really a somatic reaction. So what's happening here? That's not. Here they are supposed to live here for, and it was an accommodation. It was supposed for 1 or 3 months, and they lived for years there. So, and it was really very touching and moving, and it made something with me. And I remember when I was there, and I had a practitioner, a young woman, and she supported me with my girl groups, children groups there, and she started to cry. So, and I worked, with the people there, with the social case worker there, and I noticed that they all became exhausted and ill, and so, and at this time, it was not the first time, but I really saw and recognized how important the self-care is. And so my issue today is the self-care, and I want to share, I want to share with you my screen. Okay, there it is. Do you see it? No?
Yes.
You can see it? Ah,
Yes,
yes.
but do it a full screen.
Yeah. Okay. I
Down in the bottom top.
yeah,
Left
I
corner.
saw it with my
Left
yeah,
more this.
yeah. So okay. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Why self-care? So you see, I have a little bit old-fashioned presentation. So that's supporting me in what I want to share with you. Yeah. So you know, that's about our mirror neurons. So traumatic experiences can be transmitted directly to us, and especially if we have a lot to do with traumatic people and people. And when we listen to the stories of all this flight and violence and rape and what we hear sometimes, so on one hand, old memories of maybe traumatic experience ourselves are triggered, and what happens as well is that we start to produce images in our heads, and we cannot differentiate, is this my image, or is it the image maybe from my clients or for the people whom I'm working. Yeah, and and so that is the next point. So they really are embedded in us. So, and we need to know about our own stress level. We need to know about ourselves. What are my trigger points, and when are the symptoms? When can I feel in my body, and that is too much, or in my thoughts, or what in my system, in my whole system? When can I notice, oh, that is really too much, I need something to do. Yeah. This creates safe spaces for victims and protect us from transference. Safe space, you said it, was I'm teaching this trauma educational things, and a basic one is the trauma educational attitude. I will come there very soon. And one of the basic and most important principles is the idea, or this image of a safe space. And it's not just a safe space, of course, in the outside, and it's also a safe space in the inside. And when we are confronted with all the stories and even how they live in these accommodations, and you said it, I visited the refugee camp in Jordan, and to see the people there, it really has an impact on us. So, and it's very helpful to have an inner safe space, so I can refer on this and help myself. So, okay. So yes, so I think everybody heard of this mirror neurons, and they really have an impact. It immediately change our response, and it's biological. It's not what we can, our mind the knowledge can help, but we cannot do it by, it's unconsciously. It's in our body and it's working immediately. Yeah, we cannot hold it back. Like so. You will see some pictures now, and so you can look and notice in your body, or maybe what's happening with you now. So, yeah, you see what's happening automatically. So we go with this, and when we see someone crying, so our wrinkles go down, or so we can feel the tense when we see the anger, yeah, or we have a reaction, and we have a somatic reaction. We have a somatic in our, we have a response in our body. So, okay. And yeah, what are the transmissions ways? If we, of course, if we experience ourselves traumatic stress, and when we witnessing traumatic stress, and secondary traumatic stress means through direct contact with a traumatic story. So if someone is telling us about violence at home also, so we develop stress inside of us as well. Yeah, then is the first thing is a direct stress, and then the secondary stress. And so another form is when we deal and identify with the victims, when we deal with the helplessness, and so, and then we feel the guilt with them, and we feel the helplessness together with them. Yeah. Then there's stress in connection, of course, with structures and laws, and stress. So when we experience, so it was very common in the refugee camp in Tempelhof. So they tried, the caseworkers there, they tried to get something, a health treat for a refugee. And it was really not easy to get, because it was not so easy to work with the government together, and so, and that they gave money for the treatments. And so it was very stressful for the social workers there to deal with all the structures and the offices and the laws, things. So, and it made it causes a lot of stress for them. And what I already said, I think it always triggers some things in ourselves. So experiences, memories also, yeah. And of course, what I wrote, own everyday and work stress. It all comes together, and that can cause, if it's too much, burnout, illness. So, and so what I really experienced there, that a lot of the social workers get ill for a long time, and so, and couldn't work anymore, and some really got some serious illnesses. Yeah. What are the risk factors? I have a study of the University of Hildesheim. There's a friend of mine, she's working there. And yeah, she gave me the study, and I found it very interesting. who is, who are the people the most at risk? The people who have a lot of empathy. And I thought that's really interesting. So the people who are a lot are listening and attending to the people, and so they are really at risk because it's a compassion stress, and it's possible that they cannot deal anymore with this because they are very sensitive, you know, and if it's too much stress, they cannot cope, they cannot deal with it. And what is a big risk factor as well? Too much exposure to the stories. If it's too detailed, if it's so images, so really, so that you can really picture it and you see it so in front of you, and then it's inside of you, and that can be very dangerous for some people. And yeah, especially if you are sensitive or vulnerable. So yeah, and of course the own traumatization and traumas, that is very interesting as well in the family system. The own traumatization, if they are not processed or not enough processed, and I think a lot of people have that. And it's very interesting that trauma, you know, that trauma goes over generations. It's transgenerational trauma. And if there is a flight history in your family, and it can be the grandma or whatever, so grandma or one of the ancestors, and it's in our system, and it's triggered when we and that really happened. If you hear about the trauma of flight and what happened on the flights, and then your system is really triggered. And you don't know why, because you are thinking, I never experienced flight by myself, but it's in the system, and that is doing something with us, and it has an impact. And it's very interesting to do research in your family, what happens and what happened, because we are the generation of our grandparents. Most of them used not to tell about their traumas, and if we are now confronted again with such traumas, so it's like our system is reacting. Yet, if we are not ourselves experienced violence or rape or flight. So, warning signals here. Yeah, when flashbacks suddenly appear, and dreaming about traumatic stories of others. And I know that for myself a little bit, and I experienced with a colleague, and she wrote about Holocaust survivors and interviewed them, and she really started dreaming about the stories, and she was in the stories. So it was not just another person, it was she. So she identified so much with this that she really suffered on secondary trauma, and she got a kind of a depression. So, and it takes some months for healing, and that she could process it and differentiate. So that is my history, that's my story, and that are their stories. So yeah, but she did a great work, so it was very interesting. Yeah, and yeah, suddenly having thoughts about the victim, so that you cannot concentrate anymore. It's like coming, always this victim and the stories and what happened to them, all this is coming in your mind and you cannot concentrate on everyday things anymore. And
Maria, we will have to conclude.
Okay. Yeah, that is good that you are saying this. I have to conclude. So, yeah, that are the symptoms. And in the end, the protection factors, I think that's maybe important, that, I think a team supervision, of course, and a team trained in trauma-sensitive approach. And you need a life outside work, coping strategies to learn, and to have really a concept of self-care in your organization or whenever you work with it. And very important that working with traumatized people is exhausting, that is appropriate. And it's not the people who exhaust us. It's a confrontation with the violent events they have survived, or the continuation of injustice and helplessness that can actually bring helpers, counselors to the limits of their exhaustion more often. Yeah. So that is really, it's not the people, it's what they experienced. And so in the end, never forget the joy. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Maria. This is like, I mean, giving this lecture in a forum where you have Holocaust historians, where we meet terrible stories all the time. So this is appropriate not only for people who are working today with people with terrible stories, but for us historians who are working with terrible stories of people who are not now here mostly. So I think this is a very interesting connection, and I can also, I can use my prerogative and say that we have testimonies by Holocaust survivors who dedicated themselves to collecting testimonies of dreaming other people nightmares. Yeah. So I have this from the 60s, people talking about this. Yeah. Okay, now we come to our final presentation. Professor Hobson Faure, if I said it right. Hobson Faure is a professor at the Panthéon-Sorbonne University, Paris I, where she holds the chair of modern Jewish history and a member of the Center for Social History. Her research focuses on the intersections between French and American Jewish life during and after the Holocaust. She's the author of award-winning The Jewish Marshall Plan, the American Jewish Presence in Post-Holocaust France, which won a National Jewish Book Award, and Rescue, the story of kinder transport to France and America, which is forthcoming in Yale University Press. And I will not French titles because I don't remember the higher numbers in French.
No problem.
Okay, but she is writing a lot, and she is another dedicated friend along the way of researching the rehabilitation of children. And we are so happy that you are with us. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I am going to ask to share the screen. Let me just give you this to contemplate while I'm talking. I don't have a PowerPoint. I have just this one paper, but you can just, I'm going to try to make it a little bigger so we just focus on the house while I'm talking. And I'll start to speak by saying thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Verena and Boaz for inviting me. I'm so happy to participate in one of these workshops. And I want to also say that this is, I'm just looking at this at the same time, trying to make it bigger. Okay, so you can see the house. I don't want to distract you too much, but I do want to show you this drawing of the house. Okay, so everyone can see the house? Okay, yes. Great. Okay, so I'd like to thank Boaz especially because back in 2017, we had a debate together at a conference in Prague where we talked about children's testimony. Verena was there, and it was a debate on whether there was testimony from France. Boaz said no, and I said yes. And so at the same time, I wasn't fully satisfied with my yes. And so this kind of prompted me to look for testimony. Okay, so this I dedicate to Boaz. All right, so when we look at the unprecedented violence of 1938, we see that there were Jewish committees and individuals in France that mobilized to bring Jewish and, quote, non-Aryan, and I'm using the Nazi term, so in quotes, children to France through Kindertransport. Approximately 350 to 450 children came to France through Kindertransport under the auspices of a committee called the Comité Israélite pour les enfants venant d'Europe centrale. And they arrived in the beginning of 1939 unaccompanied, having, they were accompanied by some educators, right? And then dropped off in France, but some other children crossed the border illegally and came, I want to switch where I am so I can speak to the camera. Okay, so they came, they crossed the border illegally from France, from Germany into France, and showed up themselves at these Jewish care organizations. Roughly 130 children were cared for at an organization called L'Œuvre de la Guette, which was run by the Baroness Germaine de Rothschild. And she created a chateau in her family's hunting grounds. The chateau existed, but she created a children's home within the chateau. And she hired German-speaking educators to work with the children. Now, some of them were actually communists and socialists, unwittingly. She didn't realize, I think, their political views, but most of them were communists and socialists, several nationalities. They were influenced by Alfred Adler, the psychologist, and his work on individual psychology. And they set up within the chateau a children's republic. So this paper resonates very much with Malin's paper that I heard while I was on the train coming home. So I was listening, but I couldn't interact. In any case, within the Children's Republic, so a self-government within the home, they encouraged the children to write about their lives and recent experiences in Nazi Germany. In the spring and summer of 1939, the children, for the most part over the age of 10, wrote autobiographies, accounts of the November 1938 pogrom, Kristallnacht, and even held a fairy tale contest. They also illustrated their lives in drawings and paintings, as the one we see here. Now, I consider these testimonies collected in 1939, before the mass killings of Jews, to be early Holocaust testimony. As Boaz and other scholars have shown, adults influenced every step of their production. So to what extent can we consider them a reflection of children's lived experiences? After World War II, one of the educators, and his name is Alfred Brunner, B-R-A-U-N-E-R, used the sources produced by the children to write his PhD thesis on children in war, which he defended at the Sorbonne and published as a book in 1946. Today, using one collection of the children's writings, I'd like to contribute to the literature on children's Holocaust testimony and also deepen our understanding of rehabilitation for refugee children. Because research on children's Holocaust testimony has focused almost exclusively on Poland, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong, okay? We tend to associate it with Eastern European traditions. The children's testimonies I'll discuss today, however, were collected in France with altogether different goals. They reflect the educators' therapeutic intentions, reflecting interwar, Central European and Western European pedagogical and psychological trends, and notably the theories of Alfred Adler, Aaron Wexberg, Ovid de Crowley, and perhaps the French child educator and psychologist Henri Wallon, W-A-L-L-O-N. Equally important, they also hint at the educator's desire to gain professional recognition in an emerging branch of psychology that was dedicated exclusively to children. Studying children's reactions to war had the potential to secure the educators a place in this new field. And this is very important to them not only, they weren't self-interested, I'm not trying to frame them as that, but they were in very precarious economic situations themselves and were trying to gain a hold so that they could provide for their own families. Now, after explaining the multiple contexts in which the testimony emerged, I will very quickly explore to what extent they shed light on how children experienced the violence of 1938, a topic that, to my knowledge, has garnered little attention, in spite of the fact that we know a great deal about the pogroms of Kristallnacht. Now, to begin, I first need to talk to you about the Château de la Guette, which is the specific place where these children lived. Once in France, the children were cared for, the Kindertransport children in general, were cared for primarily by two Jewish organizations. One was the Œuvre de la Guette, and the other was the Ozacky. Each organization had children's homes, and the Œuvre de la Guette had the one chateau only. To facilitate the children's adjustment to France, each organization took the stance that they needed to hire German-speaking staff for the homes. And this is where the accidental hiring came in, because the Baroness was not a political radical, but there were quite a few socialist and communist educators that had just come back from the Spanish Civil War, where they had been helping the Republican cause. And they responded to the announcement in the Figaro, which is a conservative newspaper in France. And so they came for an interview. And so while it's important to signal the presence of female educators in the homes, there are two male educators present from March through September of 1939 that stand out in the children's wartime accounts and later testimony. The first is Ernst Jablonski, and he's later known as Jouy, Jouhy, and the other is Alfred Brenner that I mentioned earlier. Jablonski was a German communist of Jewish origin. He studied at the Humboldt University in Frankfurt before his exclusion, and he also worked at the progressive Odenwaldschule in the Hesse region. He fled Germany in the summer of 1933 for France, and he worked in a factory, the Citoyen factory, while studying with the child psychologist Henri Vallon. Alfred Brenner, whose religious background remains unclear, was born in France to Austrian parents and happened to be the nephew of the psychologist Aaron Wexberg. According to his son, Alfred Brenner was well acquainted with the psychoanalytical theories of the 30s, having translated his uncle's publications. Like Jablonski, Alfred Brenner also took part in Central European pedagogical experience and spent time in the Kaiser Eberdorf School in Vienna working with delinquent children. After earning a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Vienna, in the mid-30s, Brenner returned to France for military service because he was a French citizen. However, he brought his wife with him, an Austrian doctor, and she was unable to practice in France because she didn't have French nationality. So his wife left for Spain, and she worked as a surgery assistant in Spain during the Civil War. And Alfred Brenner met her there, and he worked collecting documentation and creating propaganda for the international brigades for their children's homes. And this is where Alfred Brenner discovered and started collecting children's drawings. And so this is a topic that later brought the couple quite a bit of recognition. They're all, you can see a lot on them on the internet. Finally, it's important to mention that Alfred Brenner, while he was still in Vienna, worked as a ghostwriter, helping PhD students finish their PhDs. And I found this quite comical, writing PhDs in exchange for cash. And so we have Jablonski and Brenner, who along with this, now I say that because it's important to keep in mind, they have no jobs in France, and they're trying to find a way to just secure maybe having an apartment, housing. And so we see maybe the idea that writing could be lucrative is something that's already in their heads. In any case, Jablonski and Brenner, along with Austrian pedagogue Ernst Papanek, which some of you may have heard of because there's been more written on him. Papanek was chosen to direct the Ozacky homes, whereas Jablonski and Brenner were in the Œuvre de la Guette. And they were all influenced by Alfred Adler's individual psychology, as I mentioned, which emphasizes the therapeutic power of groups. These pedagogues all set up self-government within the homes. They called them children's republics, and they saw this as a means of applying Alfred Adler's theory of on groups to traumatize children. They definitely considered the children to be traumatized. In this pedagogically progressive environment and in continuity with his work in Spain, Brunner encouraged the Leggett children to draw and collected their drawings, taking pains to label them according to the month. We don't see the month on this drawing that I'm showing you right now, but not necessarily recording it with the name of the artist. We see here that the artist here, Hilda Mann, she wrote her own name on the drawing. But Brunner has markings on the drawings, and he writes the month, but he doesn't write the name of the artist when he makes notes on the drawings. The educators also encouraged the children to write, and in a series of interviews conducted with the Brunner couple in the 1990s, they talked about what sparked this desire to have the kids write. And they said it was Jablonski who suggested they have the children write their autobiographies. So they reveal their most painful memories. In the end, we all agreed, yes, they should. That's my interpretation of that sentence. And we added banal questions. They said, what do you want to do later? What do you need? What kind of present would you like to receive? End of quote. Alfred Brunner saved the children's materials, taking pains to protect them during the occupation. As mentioned above, he published many of them in his PhD in 1946. Now, today I'd like to discuss a set of 11 short pieces that I found in a file labeled Nuit de Cristal, Crystal Night, which focused on the violence of 1938 in Austria and Germany. Contrary to the children's diaries, which I've analyzed elsewhere, the writings under analysis should be considered as products of an adult-centered, an adult-incited pedagogical experiment, and not as spontaneous expression of children's inner thoughts. Nonetheless, I'd like to suggest that they tell us a great deal about children's experiences, not only of the 1938 violence, but on how these refugee children perceive their world and their own vulnerability. And the short accounts translated from German to English, and you'll see the translations are not great. I need help with that. When we're taken at face value, they provide a rich description of children's lives under Nazism. They show that refugee children, even as young as 10, were able to reflect upon anti-Semitic violence at home with a striking level of maturity. 10-year-old Arthur P. from Vienna, for example, discusses the resignation of Schuschnigg and Hitler's invasion. 15-year-old Helmut describes the political divisions in his village. Half of the inhabitants, he said, were upset about the destruction of their values, whereas values meaning their beliefs, whereas the other half, especially the youth, supported Hitler. True W makes a connection between anti-Semitic hatred and the looting or the economic spoliation of Jews. She wrote, quote, "There is a hatred towards us, and the proof is the canceling of leases in order to obtain higher rents," end of quote. Furthermore, while most of the young authors display a heightened attention to politics, older children take pains to avoid generalizations. Most provide descriptive, fact-driven accounts, and they list events and actions taking place against Jews without making a value judgment. One child deviated from this pattern, providing a happy end to her account on her cousin. And she says that Jews were compensated for their pains. And this suggests that maybe she's writing a fantasy. The descriptions also reenact the geography of children's worlds. And you see this from the image here, okay? They talk about, they place their accounts in the street, at home, in school, and sometimes in synagogues. And these spaces are inhabited by the children's friends, their schoolmates, parents, cousins, uncles, fellow Jews, teachers, members of Hitler Youth, especially for the boys. Now, in terms of gender, only 2 of the 11 accounts in that file were written by girls. And so it's hard to make any generalizations. But what is interesting is that you see that girls focus on apartments and family relationships. They talk about those things, whereas the boys are focused, they focus their accounts in the street, in school, or with Hitler Youth. So this portrayal of space is evident also in the children's drawings, as you see here, where you see the uncle's guest house getting looted and destroyed on the bottom floor. What's interesting here is that the child has, the top floors remain intact and quite beautiful. And the curtains, right, are there. And so you see, I'm not a psychologist. This work brings you to psychology, right? It makes you want to make new studies in terms of psychology. Perhaps this child's world is still intact, though, I would want to suggest. right? It's only the bottom level that's touched. In any case, these observations can be deepened, and I'm going quickly, but I'm hoping I'm still okay with time. These observations can be deepened if one seeks to look beyond the content in order to probe the children's narrative strategies, paying attention to how the adolescents describe place, emotion, in their relational worlds. And this is a term that Sharon Cannister-Cohen uses in her work. Most importantly, I want to understand where they situate themselves literally in their accounts. Are they present or are they absent? And if they're present, with whom do they appear? These questions allow us to grasp how the child situated him or herself as they embarked upon their narrations of home. Paying attention to the place of the child author in the account points to the fact that just several weeks after their departure from Germany and their arrival in France, some children staunchly refused the first person singular. They're not in the accounts, whereas others chose to place themselves at the center of the action. Looking for the author in the account suggests new categories of analysis, and I can look at 3 overlapping categories. So if you bear with me here, you can see the first category. Can everyone see it? It's okay. So we see here, and you can read it on your own. I won't read it. But we see here a very, very neutral description. The child is absent, and there is absolutely no judgment. It's just a description. A second category, the child, this is the largest category. There are 5 out of the 11 could fall into this category. The child is really focusing on their families, and they're not completely absent, but the focus is really on the family itself. And the child is acting still as a witness, yet does not describe their own emotions, but is focusing on the family's pain. And this is most likely with the hope of trying to get the family out of Germany, right? This is the children think when they come to France that they'll be able to bring their families eventually. Finally, and I'm gonna just move up a little. This is quite long, right? So it's not, the time frame doesn't allow us to read all of them, okay? The last category, and there are only 3 accounts in this category, are written all by adolescent boys, and they all place, the child places himself as the center, at the center of the action, and at the heart of the action. And the accounts usually describe victimization, but the child is playing a very active role in trying to save people, help save. Here we see trying to save the religious articles in this synagogue. Okay. Now, to conclude, the Laguet children's writings provide a new example of children's Holocaust testimony that does not seem to be influenced by the Eastern European traditions of Sammlers, collectors, right? But rather by other intellectual currents, particularly Western and Central European progressive pedagogical and psychological trends. The educator's main goal was not to document Nazi crimes, but to provide a therapeutic outlet for children. And one could perhaps wonder if a secondary goal wasn't to generate data for Alfred Brunner's PhD, because he clearly, right after the war, publishes this. And possibly Ernst Jablonski has the same intention of publishing on this. He later publishes other work, Jablonski, but much later. And finally, the children had their own goals that we can try to grasp through these accounts, such as depicting a dangerous situation in Germany that would alert their educators to the need to bring their families to France. Beyond the immediate value of children's writings, I argue we can go beyond the descriptions to probe the children's narrative strategies. Instead of categorizing the narratives according to the event that they describe, or the place where it occurs, or the type of violence, I think it's possible to analyze the narratives by studying where the child situated himself. These differences certainly reflect the writing practices the children learned before coming to France, as well as their intersubjectivity. They're trying to tell the educators what they want to hear. And this reflects, of course, the children's fear that they will be sent back to Germany. Many of them share this in the interviews that I have conducted with them. Some lied and said they were Orthodox, for example, when they had no idea of the Jewish prayers and didn't grow up in Orthodox homes at all. And yet they were afraid that they would be sent back if they didn't present themselves as Orthodox. So this fear that they would be sent back is also very strong with the children, with some of the children at least. Finally, one should not underestimate the value of these sources for gaining a deeper appreciation of how children experienced the violence of 1938. Children then looked up at their educators before turning back to narrate their recent past. So thank you very much. Boaz, we can't hear you.
Boaz, we don't hear you.
Okay, sorry. So actually, we had an amazing lecture, and now I had a presentation dedicated to me. So thank you, Laura.
Absolutely. It was a good debate.
Yes, I remember it.
And
Okay.
obviously you proved him wrong.
I won.
I didn't even think of 1939 testimonies. I was always looking at
The
what
post-war.
happens after the war, and I'll be interested for you to present the next time showing testimonies from after the war.
Okay, the challenge accepted.
Okay, so look, we didn't have questions written in the chat apart from the general question of what do we think about how these things connect today, it can be relevant today. So what I want to offer the presenters who want to say a comment to conclude. So we will start from the presenters of the first panel. And if you don't want to say anything, it's fine, but we want to have a chance to give, we are not many people here, so we'll give 2 minutes response if you want to give one. So we'll start with Imke if she's still here or not. Malin. And after 2 chances, I'll stop this. Yeah, Malin is here, right?
Yeah, I just had to switch to my iPhone because I had to leave the office and go to the hotel.
Okay.
Excuse me, but what did you want me to comment on?
If you want any comment for a conclusion about the whole experience of hearing past and present, what you gained, what you gained from it, or but it's not that you must, only if you want.
No, I think I'm too tired right now, so I
So
wait for
maybe
someone
I
else.
think if anyone else wants, he should say now, and if not, I will conclude.
I have a
So,
question.
very nice.
I have a question actually. That's not how we connected to today, but can I ask it? It's
Ask away.
okay. So it's for Verena because it's a really interesting topic to place Ort within a larger history of Jews responding to anti-Semitism through economic rehabilitation. So by changing their place in the economy and becoming farmers and workers, the idea is that Jews will alleviate anti-Semitism, with the idea that anti-Semitism is caused by Jews' overrepresentation in commerce and money, right? So this idea is a strong theme in Jewish history throughout the 19th century, early 20th century. Okay, so something that you said in your talk really interested me, and it's this quote by Jacob Walensky in 1945, where he says, we have to liberate the Jewish people, the Jewish person through work. So the question is, and I think it's a deep question for your research, and it would be really interesting to see what happens here. How do we deal with that kind of sentence after Auschwitz? After forced labor and slave labor, what happens to work for Jews? And liberate the Jewish people. Am I the only one who had a resonation of Abrech Mike Fred? This is what's right. I mean, this sentence is almost an echo. And so how do we reconcile the the long past with the very recent past. So it's the opposite of the question on today, right? That's so I think it's a long-term question. I'd love to discuss it with you, and also tell you the archives are also in Paris. So I'll probably see you here.
Yes, so thank you for the comment. I mean, what you said about training and work and the fight against anti-Semitism, I mean, this is the whole idea. It's not only from art, of course, but this was the whole idea about, it's called in Germany, Berufsumschichtung, I don't know. I never know the English term for this, but retraining, I call it, in Germany, even before the Nazis came to power.
Long before. Yeah.
Of the normalization of the Jewish occupations and so on. But I don't know if I did understand your question right. How can I contextualize the quote of Jacob Ozacky after Auschwitz? So the thing is, first of all, he himself was a Holocaust survivor and was interviewed. I don't know if I'm wrong or not now. In 1944 and 46, he, of course, did not rely or make comments about this after Auschwitz, because this what we today regard as after Auschwitz was not yet there. Yes, I mean, Auschwitz was something abstract, maybe in this, of course, not in the camp survivor community, but for people from the Soviet Union who came with the infantries, yes. So I can only say now, we have to be in touch about this. We can discuss this, because I just, I mean, I'm just sorting out a project about Kindertransport from and to and between Germany and the Czech Republic. So it's interesting to add also maybe the French perspective and so on. So I cannot give you a clear and super good answer now.
No, but it's a question to leave open, but I think it's a really interesting one.
Yes.
How do they reconcile this long attachment to work after forced labor?
I will say about this that we know that from Tina's books, that people certainly felt that they worked enough for the Germans, and now the Germans should work for them. So so there's certainly a problem here and then there's this a Jewish agency film called Adama, Land, about an immigrant from Germany who comes after Kristallnacht to Eretz Israel, and he comes to a kibbutz and they send him to work with everyone, and he doesn't want to work because he worked in concentration camps. So this is certainly an issue that should be. But I want to conclude generally. I think every time we reach the conclusions of such an event, I say, wow, it's really important we are doing this, because we are learning both sides. I mean, we are learning what the questions, the academic questions we have look like today. So we are learning about these academic questions, how they are today. And I think we are opening venues for people working today to see what has been working before, or what has been deliberated before. It's not that we are inventing a new knowledge that no one has. People have been taking care of war children for the 70 years since the Holocaust. But still, we are. I feel there's an interaction. And by the way, if we look, hello, Alma. If we look at listening to children, which is something I spoke about a lot and still speak about. So people were talking about the importance of listening and listening and listening, and not as psychologists, but as educators or as historians, even listening to the story. And there was a price to pay, but they still thought they had to pay it. So I think this is an issue, the issue of self-governance by children. I just wrote a paper, it will be published in Poland soon, in the Poland journal, called Rehabilitation of Child Survivors in Poland After the War. And the issue of self-help, of self-government is very important. It's debated, not everyone likes it. So I think this idea that we see that this comes up in Sweden, and it comes up in France, and it comes up in Poland, this issue of self-government by children is a major issue. And probably when you hear the art historian speaking, it's still an issue. Because there's, how do you let the children, you said trust in the process, I say trust in the children. You're trusting the children to work with the process and find their way, which is something that we see debated throughout, because the children are not easy to work with, they are not complying, they are not, so this issue is today with children, the children, refugee children, we heard about this, and it was then. So I think this coming together is so important. I'm so happy and so thankful for anyone who participated, for all the speakers, first of all, who participated, and to all you who still made it for the last sprint. So thank you, everyone, and we'll be uploading.
Thank you.
Thank you, Verena. Also say thank you. We'll be uploading. We'll be uploading everything to the web shortly.
And
So,
thank you,
goodbye.
Verena and Boaz, for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, Daniela, for doing all
Yes.
the infrastructure and for us. So, so whenever you see an online event of Western Galilee, it's Daniela who is behind this. We built the program here. Still, we needed all the technical support and the etc. So thank you, Daniela. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. I'm still here.
Okay, we see all these partisans. Okay, so goodbye and good night. We'll be closing this room, and we have to keep on talking later on.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.